Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Organic Honeybee Management is Best for Bees and Beekeepers by Margarita Lopez Uribe and Robin Underwood of Penn State University. This webinar is brought to you by the Organic Farming Research Foundation and eOrganic with funding from the USDA NIFA Organic Research and Extension Initiative. So now I'd like to welcome and introduce today's presenters. Margarita Lopez Uribe is an associate professor of entomology, and she is Penn State's pollinator health extension specialist. Her research and extension programs aim to understand the unintended consequences of agricultural practices on the health and stability of pollinator populations. Robin Underwood is the apiculture senior extension educator at Penn State, and her program focuses on developing effective management practices for the maintenance of healthy and productive honeybee colonies. So now I'm going to turn off my video and stop sharing my screen and turn things over to our first presenter, Margarita Lopez Uribe.
Thank you, Alice, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So, we're here to talk about our experience working with organic beekeeping. This is really a project that has been ongoing for many, many years, and we are starting to, see some results. And we are big advocates for organic beekeeping, because as we will show you, it is a management system that works really well for the bees and for the beekeepers as well. So basically the story is going to be told in a kind of chronological manner, right? Like this project really started with this realization that beekeepers have a great level of a degree of variation in how they approach different problems, right? So like with any other system in agriculture, there's a great deal of variation in how people decide to go and solve problems. So this is I'm just going to remove that big message. This is a figure that you can find it online if you Google Underwood et al. 2019. And so this is just a summary figure that really exemplifies what I'm talking about. So there are lots of problems in beekeepers. For those of you who are experienced beekeepers, you know this. There are a lot of things that beekeepers have to actively be working on. And how the beekeepers respond has a great deal of variation. There are a lot of practices that are low intervention to a high degree of intervention. So when we were first starting to think about this, we basically did a study where we used a questionnaire. For those of you who are beekeepers, you may be familiar with the questionnaire, the national questionnaire that the Bee Informed Partnership has every year. They collect national data on beekeeping management practices, survival of honeybees. It's a very, very extensive questionnaire. So we use those data to identify these groups of beekeepers based on their philosophy, right? And so you will see here that one of these groups is named organic, the organic management system based on organic beekeeping philosophy. And so here we have the definitions as we basically developed them after that study. So basically the premise here is that what determines in what way beekeepers decide to apply to their colonies is driven by this idea of the beekeeping philosophy, which is the attitude that beekeepers have or the idea that they have about their role in the life of the bees. So if you're a conventional beekeeper, you are going to align with this management system that allows the use of chemicals, and they can be synthetic or natural, and antibiotics to control pests and pathogens. And there are a lot, this is a more extensive, this is a very summarized definition, but this is basically the general idea with conventional beekeeper. beekeeping. The organic beekeeping management is a system that excludes synthetic chemicals and only allows the treatment of parasites and pathogens based on non-synthetic treatments. And so these include organic acids and, for example, thymol, which are allowed within kind of organic standards. Then we also have another group of beekeepers that are under this umbrella of chemical-free, and actually there are more than one group within this group or this management system. We just submitted an article to American Bee Journal today, actually describing more in detail these sort of management system. But at the core, these beekeepers or this management system relies on kind of like natural selection, right? And basically minimizes the role of the beekeeper in maintaining the colony alive. So it heavily relies on genetics and kind of like natural selection to control pests and parasites. So if you want to like read a little bit more about this study and what we found, everything is publicly available in this paper, which again, it's easily found online. And so, well, after identifying these groups of beekeepers in these management systems, our working hypothesis was that these different styles of management and these kind of like beekeeping philosophies had an impact on management practices and as a result in the lives of the bees. So now I'm going to give the mic to Robin Underwood, who is going to talk about the follow-up study that we did, actually investigating how these management practices impact both the health of the bees and the profitability of the operations.
Okay, thanks, Margarita. Great introduction. So basically, we studied beekeepers first, and we confirmed that there are different groups with different management systems. And then, as I always say, I wanted to show the data, right? And no one had really looked side by side at these different systems to see their impact on the colony and on the economics of beekeeping. So we set out to have a large, well-replicated study where we looked at them literally side by side in different apiaries in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia. To do this, we acted like a particular type of beekeeper, and that is one that manages honeybees for honey production and also for, having great healthy colonies that overwinter and the availability of selling bees if you have excess. So we were not migratory beekeepers taking our bees to the almonds or even up and down the East Coast. We just were stationary honey producing colonies. Next slide, please. So we gave you a definition of the 3 different management systems or philosophies, but within each of those, there's still a lot of choice. So we brought together a group of 30 stakeholders from our state who were well-known, well-established beekeepers in the state that are doing their beekeeping using these systems. They didn't really know that they were classified into these groups, really. But when we came together in State College before the research started, we were able to sit down with these beekeepers and ask them all the specific details that we should know for the management. So we had conventional beekeepers. We asked them, what type of equipment should we be using? What is the timing of the treatments and things like that? So it was really great to bring in these stakeholders to help inform the research, right? So they were very vested in this research, and we met with them every year throughout the project, and they got the first line of information whenever we learned anything. They were really excellent, very helpful to the project. So next slide, please. This is just a summary of the management systems that we used. There were slight variations in the equipment, but in particular, the chemicals that were used to control the major parasite of honeybees, the varroa mite, was of utmost importance. So you can see that there's 3 columns. That's the 3 different management systems. And on the left, we have conventional. So in the conventional system, they were treated with a synthetic miticide every fall without fail. Didn't matter what their mite levels were. They always got this treatment really at this time of year, like right now. For organic, we had a more integrated pest management approach where there were multiple choices for the treatments. And we tried not to have the same one 2 times in a row, but nevertheless, chemicals were used in the fall to keep the mite levels low. And in our chemical-free system, no chemicals were ever placed into the hives. So if mites got high, we did not do anything about it. And one thing that wasn't mentioned earlier is that according to the National Organic Program, if you know that there is a problem, you must do something about it. So the chemical-free system does not fall under organic, even though it seems clean. The animal welfare part is not part of that system. Next slide, please. So these are basically our sites. We had 8 different farms, the northeast of Pennsylvania, southeast of Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, and then we also had a collaborator in West Virginia. So in each of these regions, we had 2 farms. Each farm had 36 total colonies, and each of those was broken down into 3 sets of 12. And we literally had the treatments side by side. So a set of 12 colonies had 4 that started as chemical-free, 4 that started with organic management, and 4 that started with conventional management. This all started in 2018, and we ran for 3 full years following colonies continuously throughout that time. Next slide. So here you can see one setup of 12. Unfortunately, every farmer that I asked, do you think there are bears here, said yes. So you can see that Brad is standing there by the edge of our bear fence, electric bear fence. And you can see the 3 sets of 4 all side by side in the same place. Location is extremely important in beekeeping. And so some people ask us, well, how could you have those chemical-free bees next to the ones that are being treated? Aren't they infecting them with mites? But because we were controlling mites in those colonies, it wasn't a problem. And if there were 12 of one kind here and 12 of one kind, even 100 meters away, that difference in location could have had a major effect on overwintering success and other things, mostly microclimate related. But so here you can see the side-by-side comparison with a total of 288 colonies at the beginning of the project. So honeybees, I don't know if you're aware, you can buy them in the mail. So they come in these things called packages. So each of these wooden boxes has screens on the sides. In that package is 3 pounds of worker bees, a queen in a cage, and some food. So this is how they arrived. Kind of like a swarm hanging in a tree, but it came in a box. So we got them in April of 2018 and populated all of those hives in the 288 separate spots. Next slide. Bees have to draw out combs. So that was our first year with really establishing the colony. We also wanted to improve the genetics of our colonies. So to do that, you can take out one queen and replace it with another mated queen. So in this way, we were able to have what we call sister queens. So this breeder here, Devin, was able to take worker larvae from the same colony to make us more than 300 queens that were all related, because we really wanted our results to definitely be the result of management and not anything to do with the genetics of the bees, because that is a whole other study. So we got queens and we took out, the queens that came with the packages and replaced them with Devin's queens. So now we have sister queens throughout the project. Next slide, please. We measured lots of things about these colonies throughout the study. Many of them are looking at the health of the honeybees. So one thing that's quite critical to beekeeping is to monitor levels of the parasitic varroa mite. So we do that by taking a sample of 300 workers from a colony and washing them in alcohol, and then we separate out the mites from the bees and count them. So this gives us some kind of percentage of bees with a mite on them. So for example, if you wash 300 bees and you get 6 mites, you have a 2% infestation. And that's the number that we use to monitor and determine whether they're over a threshold and need a chemical intervention or not. We also were able to do a lot of lab tests. So one of those things that we were looking for was, what are the virus levels in the bees going into winter? There were some health biomarkers that we looked at, including vitellogenin, which is a marker of nutrition, and then a couple of immune genes to see, if their immune systems were activated going into the winter. Each year we looked at honey production because, of course, if we're managing bees for honey production, we want to make as much honey as possible. And also, overwintering survival is critical. Clearly, if half your bees die over the winter and you're starting over and having to replace them, that's a very expensive thing for beekeepers. So in addition, while we were doing this, because we were managing all of these 288 colonies as scientists, we collected tons of data, wrote down everything, every single colony. We know the treatment that was given and the date, how much did that cost, how many drops of honey did those bees make, and everything, how many times did we have to visit, etc. So that lent itself to a nice economic analysis of the differences between these systems. And as I mentioned before, we ran this for 3 solid years. So we have data on 3 winters with these colonies and 3 summers of honey production. So this is what it looks like for the varroa mite numbers in the colonies. And I see the question in the chat that I'm going to answer for this. So basically, this is 3 years of data where we did those alcohol washes once a month. So we do them April through October. We don't disturb the colonies and check over winter because the mite levels are pretty stable during that time. And what you can see is mite levels stayed pretty low throughout the season. They just sort of start to increase in the fall. And by the way, right now I consider fall. So for a beekeeper, it's fall. Time to get ready for winter, even though somebody wrote in here that it was 100 degrees out. That's okay. Winter is still coming for us here, at least in Pennsylvania. And we were watching for a threshold of 1%. So if a colony had 4 mites in a wash of 300 bees, that was a trigger that we needed to do something. Except, of course, in the chemical-free colonies where we monitored but never did anything about it because that was not part of the management system. So you can see the orange is chemical-free and it rises quite high each fall. So the first fall, when the colonies were just being established, they got to about 4% infestation. In the second year, after they had existed longer and had everything established, they got much higher, over 8%, and that was repeating again in the third fall without any interventions. But what you can also see is that both organic and conventional, so the green and the purple, rode together. Mite stayed low, we treated here in the fall, they stayed low, we treated in the fall, they stayed low. So both of them were effective at keeping the mites where we wanted them to be. Next slide. So yeah, that's okay. What did that mean then for viruses? So varroa mites they transmit viruses from bee to bee, and they also activate viruses, and the viruses can replicate within the mites. So, we don't have any viral treatments except to keep mite numbers low, right? If you control the mites, you are basically controlling the viruses. So what you're looking at here is a snapshot of the fall, each fall, 2018, 19, and 20. So these are the viral loads that the bees went into winter with. So these samples were taken each October after treatment had occurred, after fresh new bees had emerged and everything since the August treatment. And so it's pretty clear year after year that if you do not control your mite population, you're going to have higher deformed wing virus levels. So this is a devastating virus that when you see symptoms, you can see larvae that are dying and becoming liquid. And if they get to adulthood, the bees have literally deformed wings and cannot fly and will never be foragers, which clearly is devastating to a honeybee colony. So you can see higher levels of deformed wing virus every fall when chemical interventions were not used, but decreased virus levels in both conventional and organic. So those are significantly different than if you didn't use any chemicals. And numerically, the organic management had lower virus than the conventional management year after year after year. Next slide, please. So when we look at the health biomarkers, such as immune genes, we have one example here. This is called defensin 1. And it is, to me, when I describe it to a beekeeper, I say this has their immune system is excited and active. We don't want an active immune system. We want it to be calm and not dealing with anything, right? So here you can see that the chemical-free system had their immune systems responding or, being upregulated compared to conventional and organic, which were either equal or here in the third year, lower in organic than in conventional. So that's a positive. Next slide. When we, in terms of honey production, what's the bottom line for the beekeeper? Because we said these are better for bees and beekeepers. Of course, we want to make as much honey as possible. So what you can see in the first year, honey production was terrible. That makes total sense because the bees were using up the honey, using energy to create the comb that they need to, for their home to build. And that's a very expensive process. So that was an establishment year. But then when we got into the next 2 years where they had the comb that they could just simply fill instead of building the walls, they were able to just fill them. Honey production was quite good. And what you'll notice is conventional and organic made more honey than chemical free. And by the way, this is per set of colonies. So an apiary would be that set of colonies, the 4 for conventional, 4 for organic, and 4 for chemical free. So it's kind of like added all together. But again, you can see conventional and organic higher honey production than chemical free, and organic is higher than conventional. So again, another positive of the organic management system. That's really great. I'm glad that the bees are healthier and that they're making more honey, but the critical thing is making it through the winter. And it was quite heartbreaking as a researcher to have that system where we don't intervene, because I could see the writing on the wall in the fall that the chemical-free colonies were likely not going to survive. So you can see the first winter, we lost all but 36% of those first original colonies. And then of those, we lost all but 25%. And then of those, we lost all but 35%. So we started with 96 colonies in the spring of 2018. And by the spring of 2021, there was only 1 chemical-free colony remaining. In the other 2 treatments, where we looked at an economic threshold and used a chemical intervention to control varroa mites, the survival was excellent. It was never more than 18%. 1 year, it was far less. It was in the single digits. So clearly, both of these management systems were excellent. Survival meant that not only did we have the colonies that we needed to continue, but we had extra. So we were able to take these and split 1 colony into 2, make up for any of our losses, and have some to spare. So that's exactly what you would like in your business. You don't want to be running out of things. You want to have excess. And so the bees survived extremely well because of the mite management and the subsequent health things that we had measured. So if you put this all together, the complicated story becomes quite simple. Basically, if a honeybee colony is in a conventional or organic system, like you see on the left, the overarching arrow means that it's a positive for survival compared to the chemical-free system. So if you want to break that down into the smaller arrows, let me just orient you to what this is showing you. So you can see the lighter color, the orange, is a positive interaction, and the red is a negative interaction. And the wider the arrow, the more significant that interaction is. So on the left, if you are a honeybee colony in the conventional or organic system, there is a huge negative impact on varroa mites. That means the parasites go down. There is a decrease in Viremorpha cerani, which is a gut parasite, which we didn't really mention, but that is decreased. Decreased virus, decreased immune system reaction, and so it's overall positive. Notice it says negative, but negative means positive, right? You don't want any of these things in the middle. You don't want mites and you don't want lots of deformed wing virus. So those two management systems were excellent. And if you look to the right, then what you can see is that, you know, if you have fewer mites, you're more likely to survive. If you have less nosema, you're more likely to survive. Less deformed wing virus, more likely to survive, and so on. So definitely both of these management systems do very well for bees. However, when I talk about it, yep, go ahead. I figure if the organic system has excellent outcomes, why do we need the conventional system, right? So why should we be putting synthetic chemicals into our colonies when we don't need to? There are plenty of organic approved things that you can do that have great outcomes. And so I promote the organic colony management system now with my teaching. I'm trying to teach beekeepers how to do it, teach them why that it's a positive, teach them to tell their customers about this, because the organic system is excellent. So to go to the bullet points, varroa mites are critical. Clearly, you can control them using organic acids and thymol. Overwintering survival was excellent, but not so in the chemical-free system. And the amount of honey was quite high as well. So there's positive for bees and it's positive for beekeepers. So what did that mean for economics? Oh, by the way, sorry. You can read about this. We have published this in a scientific journal, so you can look up this article online. It's freely available, and you can read all about it and see some other graphs and things like that. But what does this mean for the beekeeper in terms of economics? So there were lots of things that cost money and some things that gained money for the beekeeper. So as we did this research and we wrote everything down, we knew exactly how much food each colony had been given, either in liquid form of what we call ProSweet, which is an invert syrup, or in winter food, which are solids, or potentially some protein being added, which happened for the organic system. How much did the treatments cost for varroa mites, depending on which one, how often it was used, etc. So we had all that information, plus how much honey was made, how much it was sold for. By the way, this was the same price regardless of management system. So there was no premium for cleaner products in this calculation at all. And then lastly, we have what we call a split, or a nuclear colony, or a nuke. This was when we were able to, in the spring, split a very strong colony into two. And if we had enough for ourselves already to keep our number consistent, we were able to sell them. So that's a profit there. So what happened with these systems? Well, this graph is showing just costs. So the cost for bees was the same for all of the treatments because they all started with one package of bees. So that's on the left. In the middle, you can see how much food had to be given to the colonies. basically, the explanation for the less food for chemical free is twofold. One is we often left more honey behind for them so they could eat more natural food. And also there weren't really so many left to feed. And then lastly, we have the treatments. So a lot of times people in the chemical free philosophy say that, well, treatments are really expensive and it doesn't really improve my outcome, which we just showed it does, but also that cost was quite minimal compared to, say, feed. So then what did it look like for profits? So you can see here in terms of honey profits, again, the first year, not much honey production because of building wax comb. Then you can see a clear difference where conventional and organic made more honey than chemical free, and the organic system made more than the conventional system. So the income from these, from honey production was 30% more for organic than it was for conventional. And so that was a great improvement. And again, remember that is at the same price. So overall, if you look at profit, so this is like taking out your costs and adding in your income, you can see that by year 3, so year 1, which was 2018, is your establishment year. It's very expensive to get started. But then in the subsequent 2 years, profits were definitely made. And we would expect for it to continue that way in the years to come, because the comb was all built out and the bees were established and overwintering very well. So you would expect the same year after year. So you can see that making a third more honey gives you a third more profit. So in summary, during this research, we were able to show that you can effectively control varroa mites. The two systems are the same, so why not go organic? And the organic was even the most profitable. So again, very exciting results from this. So I think now Margarita is going to take over and tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, Robin, thank you. So, well, I hope that you, Robin did a great job, explaining everything and how well the data demonstrates that really organic outperforms definitely chemical free and has some advantages over conventional. But then, because we call these an organic management system, a very common question that we get is, can I certify my products as organic honeybee products? And so this is kind of a whole different idea and a whole different question, and we're currently working on that. But we wanted to share with you kind of like the answer as of today for this question, right? So to certify products from the honeybee colony as organic, you do need to follow an organic beekeeping management system, which we already showed. It works really well. You can keep healthy bees and highly productive bees. You do need to use an organic source for those bees that you get. But then we have these very difficult aspect of organic beekeeping certification, which is that the colonies have to be located in a pesticide-free foraging zone of at least a 3-kilometer radius. So we just did the calculations for this ABJ article, and that equals over 6,000 acres of organic land. So what this translates into is that it is very difficult or impossible in continental US to have an area of that size that is certified organic and pesticide free. However, something that we did for this previous study that Robin shared with you is we did do some pesticide residue analysis of the wax and pollen samples from the colonies. So remember, something that we didn't say, or maybe Robin said at the beginning, is that all of these farms were organic farms. They are certified organic farms, but as I said, they are quite small in terms of like acreage. So we had all of these colonies under the different management systems, and we had them on organic land, but really the pesticide-free zone was much smaller than what it is required for this certification. So what we did is we wanted to see, okay, so how clean can the products be if I have the colonies in on an organic certified farm? And so for that, we collected the wax, and we worked with the chemical ecology facility at Cornell University. This is the link. Any person can submit samples to these labs. So if you are curious or interested about pesticide contamination in any of your colonies, you can use this resource. And all they ask for is 10 grams of wax, and you submit the sample, and they do all the analysis for, I think now they have over 93 agricultural pesticides. So, well, this is what we find. I'm basically covering the data right now because I want to orient you for what I'm about to show you before I show the data. So basically what we wanted to know is, okay, if these farms are all organic, but they are surrounded by different agricultural activities, we would expect that the pesticide contamination would be very different for all the sites. And so what we found is that there wasn't a very significant difference for the sites, right? Like, so basically each of these circles and all of that mess in that figure are the different sites that we had in the different colonies that we had in the study, and they are colored by the sites. So here are the two sites from West Virginia. So they tended to be a little bit different, but for the sites in Pennsylvania, pretty much we had the same or comparable levels of background pesticide contamination. Now, this is a monster figure, but don't get scared. I'm going to walk you through it. So as you can see here, this is a list of all the pesticides that Cornell University does analysis for. And here we have our samples for pollen. You can see here pollen, and here you can see wax. And so these are pollen and wax from our colonies, and these are three different categories of the pesticide: fungicides, herbicides, and insecticides. So, of course, the wax is not completely pesticide-free, but it is very interesting to see that there is relatively low abundance of most pesticides, right? So the other thing that I want to draw your attention to is, these scale bars. So this is a heat map. And so if the colors are on this kind of like pale yellow scale, is because the pesticide was found there, but it was found at a very, very low scale. So basically, we do have kind of like this consistent pesticide contamination from a couple of insecticides. They were very, widespread in wax and pollen. But these products from the hive are orders of magnitude cleaner than what we get from what Cornell University gets from wax samples from colonies that are located in conventional agriculture. So this is the figure that Scott McCart shared with me. This is, a study where they did pollen from the colony and honey from the same colonies, and they looked at the same list of pesticides. And so you can see that, again, the other difference is the scale bar, right? So we had in the previous slide, we had from 0 to 300. And here we have 0 from 2,500 parts per billion. So the contamination of pesticides, particularly in the pollen, is significantly higher in these colonies that are located in conventional agriculture. And so even though in our experiment, we couldn't find completely pesticide-free products, the products are coming out pretty clean. So that is very exciting. And so the answer to the question, can I become certified if I follow beekeeping management, organic beekeeping management protocol or style? The answer is no, because currently we do need to follow these standards, and it is clearly impossible to have this size of pesticide-free area in continental US, right? So This was just a slide that I used for another presentation, just to kind of like give people, this was a presentation in Ohio, so giving people an idea of the scale of the size of the area that would be necessary to meet that standard for certification. So the exciting news that we want to share with you is that we are currently working on another OREI-funded project where we are actually going a step farther and trying to follow up on these exciting results. So the underlying hypothesis that we have is that if we can provide the bees, or if we can place these colonies in landscapes that have high quality resources and that are organically managed, even if they don't meet that requirement for the radius, they could be supporting products that are pesticide free. And the reason to hypothesize that is that we know that even though honeybees, if you read articles and books and all of that, they say, well, they can fly up to like 10 kilometers away from the colony. That is true, and that has been demonstrated, but they are optimal foragers, right? So if they have really high quality food near the colony, they are not going to decide to fly 10 kilometers away from it. So, so what we're currently studying is really more detailed foraging behavior of bees, to see if the combination of having a relatively sizable area of organic land and high quality floral resources around the colony can actually, translate into honeybee products that are pesticide free. So stay tuned for the results of that study. But yeah, I guess this is the take-home message from this webinar. Organic beekeeping offers an economically profitable opportunity for beekeepers, because as you saw, the honeybees they have high survival and they produce a lot of honey. And we're hoping that with the research that we are continuing to do, we can create opportunities for the organic certification in the future. So this is to be determined. But I also wanted to give this plug for some of the educational programming that Robin is offering through Penn State Extension. So this is a fact sheet where you can find all of the details about how to do or follow these organic management systems for honeybees. Robin also is offering a workshop. A certification is a series of webinars, and there's a follow-up hands-on day. Of course, you would have to live in the area or fly to Penn State to do the hands-on part. And yeah, and with that, I would like to make sure we acknowledge all the people that have made this project possible. As you can imagine, this requires dozens and dozens and dozens of people who are willing to volunteer and help out and collaborate with us. And of course, to USDA or EI for their funding. So I think that's it, and I guess we can take some questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
So thank you for that really informative and interesting presentation. And if you have a question, feel free to just type it into the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll be reading them out loud for the next half an hour or so until we run out of time. Okay, so Lorena asked a question. Okay, so you were talking about the introduced queens. And so she asked whether the sister queens still introduce variability because they have varying paternal genetics.
Sure, yes. Is that a short enough answer?
Okay.
They were open mated all in the same place, so they had access to the same drones, but yes, there would be genetic variability.
And then we had a question about whether the bees come with the mites or whether the mites come from somewhere else.
Yes, pretty much every honeybee colony has mites.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and yeah, and I think it's probably a combination of both, right? So when we get packages, they are generally treated before they are established, right? Like to knock down any mites that come with the colonies. But because of the way that mites reproduce, even if you have a handful of mites in the colony that you couldn't knock down, they exponentially reproduce and they build up really quickly in the colony. So.
Okay, and then we had a comment here from Kim who said that she's a Canadian organic inspector and organic honeybee colonies must be 3 kilometers from any GMO crops. So this increases the reduction in potential synthetic pesticides being brought to the colony in a certified organic colony. Anyone have any comments on that?
I would say that, yeah, that is part of that forage area. Also in the US, you can't use GMO if you're organic. So we could also provide the link to our National Organic Program standards if somebody wanted to read those details.
Okay, yeah, that would be a good idea too. Maybe I can send those along with the information later.
And I guess, something that I think it was written on the slide, but I didn't read out loud, is that there is these surveillance zone outside of the required 3 kilometer, right? So the area that is really kind of like part of the standards at the moment is, absolutely huge.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Tracy asks here, is the system mature by year 3, or do you anticipate that the net income will increase in years 4 and 5 and beyond?
Yeah, so as I was trying to explain, I don't know if people aren't beekeepers at all, but when you start a new colony on new equipment, they get kind of like a midrib of a honeycomb, right? And then they have to build out both sides, and that's quite energy expensive. So in the first year, they were able to build enough for the brood chamber, so 2 boxes. In the third year, they each at least built 1 or 2 more boxes, which would be the honey supers. And in the third year, yes, we still had to give them some undrawn comb, we call it. So yes, I think that year 4 would have been at least as profitable as year 3, perhaps a little bit more. And then from then on, it's kind of stable because you have all of your comb established and you can keep reusing it.
Alice, I think someone is asking if we can move to this. Oh, sorry. They wanted to see the bee, I guess. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
I thought they didn't want the slide.
Okay, wait.
You want to see the bee by your head? Oh.
Yeah, I didn't understand what I read at the beginning. Yeah, this is a squash bee. It's not a honeybee, though. So
nice background, though. Okay, let me go back here to the questions. Let's see. Okay, comparing conventional versus organic, were the number of mite treatments the same per year and the number of hours spent on the farms the same or different?
I would say that we had to treat them about the same number of times. So that was like, how many times did the mites get over threshold? So that's kind of a spring and summer buildup type of problem that is consistent in both. So I would say they were the same. And also, for this project, we visited the colonies every 2 weeks without fail. And we always visited all the colonies. So we can't really say anything about time. Like, for example, for the chemical free, generally those beekeepers don't visit that often, but we had to for this project to collect our data. So they would have saved time by just like leaving the bees to do their thing a lot of the time. And they also wouldn't have spent time monitoring for mites, for example, because they're not going to treat anyway. But for conventional and organic, I feel like they're about the same. Because you always have to, you have to monitor for mites once a month, and you have to go and add supers or take away supers about the same.
Okay. Okay. So here's a question that I'm just wondering too. So I see honey in stores that are labeled as organic, and they think, okay, and this Mark's saying that the ones that he saw is from the mountains of Colorado. So is it possible that, like, how is it then that there's honey labeled organic? Are they very far away from?
It's usually imported, right? So that's the first thing.
What did you say?
That it's usually imported. It's
Oh, it's
not
usually
produced in the US. So usually you see like honey produced either or imported from Brazil or produced in Hawaii.
Huh.
Yeah, you have to look at those labels very carefully. Not the
Yeah.
label they printed, but that black, almost invisible stamp will probably say product of Brazil.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And and part of what we're doing right now is actually doing some pesticide analysis on those honeys that are being marketed as organic, just to actually see how that compares to, for example, our organically uncertified honey, which was pretty clean, but is not pesticide free, right? So that's something that we're wondering too.
Okay, Sagar here is asking whether you've observed Spinosid in the honey or any other byproduct.
Yeah, I was just trying to get to the S's on the list to see if that was one of, yes. So that is one of the things that was looked at. So it would have been in our analysis. So we did look. I don't know what the result is.
Yeah,
So.
I don't remember. Let me look at the figures, but I remember seeing like a huge contamination of that.
Yeah, if you're curious about which pesticides were looked at, I did put in the chat. I wrote Fred. You can see the list here, and it has the Cornell site, the list of the 93 pesticides.
Right. Okay, and I guess, okay, here's a question. I guess, you had said this in the beginning, but maybe, a couple of people came on a little afterwards. So what was the hypothesis on which this extensive study was premised?
Well, basically, we wanted to know which management system was best, right? So is it better to have conventional, organic, or chemical-free beekeeping? And I think we successfully answered the question.
Yeah, and I think one of an important premise is that with like there are costs and benefits with everything that you do, every decision that you decide to everything that you decide to do with your colony may have like positive or negative effects. So when you talk to chemical-free beekeepers, they really they really think that the introduction of these chemicals that are not naturally in the colony was really detrimental, and that would have a big cost even if they had mites. And so I think that that was kind of like the premise, right? Like there are these costs and benefits for each of these management systems, but what we really found is that the benefits of introducing these chemicals to control the pests outweigh any potential negative effect that they have in the colony.
Okay, let's see. Is there any research looking at the flavor profiles of honey samples that are relatively free of residues versus honey samples with high pesticide residues?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't know who would volunteer for such a study. Give me the high pesticide one, please. Yum.
That's right. You might
I guess that's the
might not get
question.
it approved.
Can you
Yeah,
taste
no,
it?
that's an interesting question. You might not get it approved by the IRB.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the reasoning why there are so many chemical-free beekeepers? What estimate percentage are they, and what strategies do you have besides education to help them change their philosophy?
I would say that it's a small percentage, more likely in hobbyists, clearly, because they only have a few colonies, and people that use that management system, I believe, really think they're doing what is best for the bees. They think that they're helping with natural selection and making stronger bees. But what's missing is the fact that it's the whole entire honeybee population that evolution acts on, right? So if it's just them in their backyard with their 2 colonies, that's just 2 colonies, right? 2 individuals, really, compared to the hundreds and thousands of other honeybee colonies around them that are not part of this natural selection, right? So yeah, they might keep bees without chemicals and then they die, so they're out of the gene pool, but everyone around them isn't doing that. They're using the chemicals, so they're keeping the mite susceptible bees in the gene pool. So I guess what I'm saying is, except for actual queen breeders, I don't think that a backyard beekeeper can or should be keeping their bees without treating for mites, right? I totally understand it's a totally different story if the purpose of your beekeeping is breeding. Then you need to have many hundreds of colonies, you need to be monitoring them. And in those cases, when the mites get out of control, they actually eliminate those bees from the population and they add in more mite resistant bees. So in that is doing good and on a population level, at least in that region. But so education is important for that. I also think it's important to point out that part of the organic standards where animal welfare matters and how you can't just let them languish, to kind of like pull at the heartstrings, because they're like, I'm doing what's best for my bees. The chemicals smell bad and it hurts them. And then I'm like, well, the mites hurt them, and you can see it with your own eyes. So I did have a beekeeper that worked for me for this project who was treatment free and saw what we were doing. And it kind of clicked with him that not looking isn't the right approach, but monitoring and seeing that the mite levels are getting high and doing something about it and keeping those colonies that keep mites low, but not the ones that don't. And then he became a like an intermittent treater, right? Because he learned that monitoring is a good thing, for his program. So that type of education, the hands-on stuff, I think is critical. Like, see it for yourself.
Right.
And I saw the chat go crazy during that, so I don't have to go read.
Okay.
Maybe you have something to say, Margarita.
No, I was just sharing the link to Cornell, but I guess just a tiny comment following up what you just said, Robin. We did see a few of those beekeepers that helped us develop the protocols, who were part of the chemical-free group. They did transition to organic management after they worked with Robin really closely and they saw the results of the research. So yeah, I guess, that's something that we would like to work on, kind of like this transition, right? Like in implementation a little bit more with more outreach.
Okay, we have a couple people from different climates on the webinar. So I guess one let's see, Lorraine was asking, that's because they don't have winter where she is, what would be our feed program and treatment times? And then Elizabeth asked, just in general, what's the best temperature to treat colonies for mice?
Temperature dependence is chemical dependent. So certain chemicals have strict guidelines. For example, formic acid, you don't put it on if it's going to be 85 or above for the first 3 days, for example. The thymol product, it can be 104 and that's okay. Oxalic acid, it's not really about the temperature itself, but it's about like how tightly the bees are clustered together in the colony. So each product is different. So that's a whole webinar probably in and of itself. But in terms of timing, you have to understand what your bees are doing when you're making your choice. So of those 3 products, by the way, those are the 3 organic approved chemical treatments for varroa mites. Oxalic acid and thymol only kill the mites that are on adult bees. So it's a good idea to get to know your parasite and understand when they're vulnerable to those chemicals and when they're not, because they reproduce in the cell that's capped over with wax and they escape treatment. Formic acid, on the other hand, does treat both. It gets into the cappings and can kill the reproducing mites and the mites on adults. So you need to choose based on your local area, what is the season? What are the bees doing? Can you do repeated treatments if you're using one that's just for mites on adults? If you're using thymol, it can't be during the honey flow because it will change the flavor and the smell of it, and and you don't want that. So I would suggest talk to someone local to you and ask them for their advice.
Okay, a question about oxalic acid and whether it's safe for human consumption via treated honey.
It was recently approved for use with honey supers on. And also, by the way, it's in some of the food that we eat already. So I do believe it is safe. Of course, there are dosage amounts, I'm sure some amount is not safe. I wouldn't like take a spoonful of the crystals that I'm vaporizing or anything like that, but I think it's okay. And it's organic approved, so that makes me even more confident.
Okay, let's see. In the future research, will you also be including mechanical practices used in organic production, such as drone boards, to review how these practices may reduce the need for chemical intervention to reduce pests?
Yes, that's one thing I didn't mention. In our organic system, we did use the drone brood removal method. And if you remember the graph of the mites, I feel like it didn't really keep them down. But something unexpected, we thought that scraping off the drone brood every 2 weeks when we visited would affect honey production. And as you saw, the organic colonies actually made more honey. So it certainly did not hurt honey production. We also did have screen bottom boards on some of the colonies. So we did incorporate those, but those were determined by our stakeholders at that meeting with all the people. They told us, which things to use and which not to. But yeah, you could do a totally different project, still have an organic system, and use different types of mechanical and cultural controls than we did, and it would still fall under that system. So that's a caveat with that that publication. The publication is telling you, what did we do for this research? Exactly. It's not telling you all the things that you can do within organic. So keep that in mind. Like, read the paragraph at the top of the page before you dive in.
Okay, good advice. Let's see. How many years are you reusing the honeycombs? Is pesticide buildup occurring?
I'm not going to answer how many years I use it. I'm going to answer it in what advice do I give? Because, I recommend swapping out about 1/3 of the comb every year. So that's approximately 3 years. The samples that we took were at the end of year 2, just to put that into perspective. So they had been in the brood nest from the beginning, built out early on in 2018, and then they were sampled fall of 2019. So there was 2 years of buildup in those combs.
Okay, let's see. Susanna brings up the point that not all conventional acreage is GMO, and are Canadian organic bees required to be 3 kilometers away from all conventional agriculture or just GMO? And what about residences that might be treating their lawns or gardens?
I can't specifically answer about Canada, but maybe one of those other people that said they were an inspector could answer that in the chat.
Yeah, and you can, in the chat, you can choose to send the message to everyone or just the hosts and panelists with a little arrow next to where it says to. So I just want to mention that because I think a couple people might have just sent us a message when they meant to send it for everybody or that kind of thing. So
yeah, the thing about residences is we're really tough. In fact, when we were looking for sites for our new project where we have, we're looking at the flight, there would be this beautiful radius and then there'd be like this chunk of like residential, and I was like, so yeah, we need to keep farmland and not have that if we want to hope to have nice large swaths of organic.
okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, I guess Mark was wondering whether people who were conventional beekeepers who used heavy amounts of chemicals switched to be more organic over the course of the study.
Margarita, was that what you were mentioning earlier?
So yeah, I think we saw kind of the chemical free, like transitioning to organic. And so I think something that I didn't have time to mention at the beginning is that there are kind of like two big factors that are associated with how beekeepers manage their colonies. So one is this idea of philosophy, right? Like how they feel what is their role in the life of the bees. But there is another component or another axis, which is the size of the operation. So, so the study, as Robin said at the beginning, was really trying to kind of like emulate what a mid-sized beekeeper could manage, right? Like apiaries of like 48 colonies. But if you're managing, like thousands of bees of colonies, right? We haven't studied that, but it may not be feasible to implement some of these practices, right? So that's something to keep in mind, that when like the size of the operation is another component that we haven't really investigated, but we know it matters for what you decide to implement in terms of management.
Okay, Andy here was wondering, he's heard some talk about antiviral products being developed from mushrooms. Is this hype or is there real promise?
I've only just read the papers myself, so I don't really want to comment. Is that a fair answer? I don't know enough to have an opinion yet. Hopefully they'll continue.
I think there is a lot of excitement even within the scientific community, right? But I think that sometimes we, like when we do experiments, they may work well in, a small control setting, but then, like whether this is scalable and, like actually profitable at, like scales of beekeeping, that's questionable. So I think that I agree with Robin's hesitation, right? Like we need to like wait and see, but kind of fundamentally, there seems to be very interesting and promising opportunities for antiviral compounds.
Okay. Are there any biocontrol organisms that can reduce varroa mite numbers in a hive?
There's no biocontrol for varroa mites at this time.
Okay. And then Gladstone was wondering your estimate of the percentages of different beekeepers in the USA amongst the three categories that you identified. Do you have any information on that?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to know. Because if we go by the BIP survey, for example, the Bee Foreign Partnership survey, what we got was like there was a tiny portion of beekeepers who were like chemical free. However, usually the big groups of chemical free beekeepers have their own channels of communications, right? Like they go to different meetings. There seems to be kind of like a disconnect in terms of the communication channels. So I don't really think we can have a good grasp to, like the answer for that question. But Robin, I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Like, before we did the study of the beekeepers, I attended lots of beekeeping meetings and people would just fight with each other and tell everyone that I'm doing it right, you're doing it wrong. No, I'm doing it right, you're doing it wrong. And the chemical free philosophy people really don't want to be told at every meeting, you need to treat, you need to use chemicals. Like they don't want to hear it. So they just don't go. And therefore they probably don't participate in the surveys either. So it's hard to get them to be in the normal beekeeping circles because they're kind of outside of it. So that's what Margarita was saying. They just have like their own meeting where nobody has to tell them to use chemicals.
Okay.
But hopefully they've heard the results of our study anyway, even if they didn't like them.
Okay, let's see. I think we have time for one more question here, and that is, do you know of any pesticide that colors the comb as it is made? I can't see the whole question here. Something about there was a pesticide that filled out in the comb and it was bright yellow. The queen was a scacatraz from Kentucky and bees from another scacatraz existing colony. Does that make sense?
I know about Saskatraz queens. I don't know about pesticides that color the wax.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be nice if we could see it with our own eyes?
Okay. Well, I really just want to thank you all, everyone in the audience included, for this great discussion and for all these interesting questions and varied questions. And I want to thank you again, Robin and Margarita, for this really informative and interesting presentation of your study. And everyone will be getting an email that has a link to Robin's article and anything else that the presenters think might be worth providing a link to, for example, the organic certification requirements for organic beekeeping. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and a special shout out to the Organic Farming Research Foundation for helping to organize this webinar, and to Anifa Oriai for funding it. So thanks very much.
Thank you.